Austin Tech Connect is the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. Founded in 1992, ATC exists to help unite the local technology ecosystem and to encourage the spread of community, collaboration, and conversations in Central Texas. This podcast is sponsored by SailPoint. They are a leading provider of identity security for the modern enterprise, empowering organizations worldwide to put identity security at the core of their business. With a foundation of artificial intelligence and machine learning, SailPoint Identity Security delivers the right access to the right identities and resources at the right time. Now, here is this week's episode.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Austin Tech Connect. This is the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. My name is Tom Singer, and I have been with the Austin Technology Council for now over 2 years, and we are looking to celebrate the past, be present in the now, and look to the future. You know, Austin's gone through so many changes the last 30, 40 years, and we have become this international innovation tech hub. But today, we're going to talk a little bit about how we got here, because today's guest is Admiral Bobby Inman. Admiral, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So for those of you who don't know Admiral Inman, you really should. He has been a mainstay in Austin for, about 40 years. And he is responsible for helping move MCC here back in the 80s. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. That is one of those pivotal marks where we say that was a foundational move that helped Austin grow to where we are today. But he has done so much more than that in his time here in Austin. So I want to just dive in with the Admiral, learn a little bit about him. We'll talk a little bit about Austin, and then we'll look to the future. So, Admiral, let's start with your military career. Tell us about that.
Multiple careers along the way. Went to the Navy Officer Candidate School to avoid being drafted. Korea. Ended up staying 31 years. Shifted about 10 years along to the intelligence field. So the last 22 years were largely involved in intelligence world. I had the good fortune of running a number of intelligence agencies. I was Director of Naval Intelligence, Vice Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Director of the National Security Agency, Deputy Director of Central Intelligence, Deputy Director of CIA, over 8.5 years. Retired in 82 with a full rank of Admiral.
Well, first of all, thank you for your service.
Thank you. There were a lot of wonderful opportunities when I retired. Got a lot of publicity when I left government. And the end result, I agreed to put together the country's first large-scale joint research venture owned by competing computer and semiconductor firms. The whole concept was the idea of Bill Norris, who was the CEO of Control Data. They approached me to implement this idea. 15 of the companies had agreed to be owners, sponsors. When I agreed to do it, they said, well, where do you want to live? And I said, wrong answer. I want to make sure that wherever we go, the locale feels that they've got an obligation to help support this. We did a public site selection. 57 cities in 27 states bid.
Wow, and what year was this?
82, 83. It was 83.
There hadn't been a lot of these large site selections like that back in those days. Now, big companies and groups do it all the time, but that was pretty pioneering, wasn't it?
It was, and we did it on word of mouth. The first hearings were in Washington on the 25th of February. Boston, Albany, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Virginia, Northern Virginia, and Research Triangle, North Carolina. Second hearings, 3rd of March, San Francisco. 5 San Francisco cities. The lieutenant governor decided to preside over that, which prompted the governor of Arizona to come present for Phoenix and Tucson, and the governor of Utah for Salt Lake. Oregon, just the city of Portland showed up, nobody else. The third set of hearings were in Chicago on the 18th of March. Governors and large delegations from Ohio, Minnesota, Michigan, Illinois, Texas, and Georgia. And then the fourth set of hearings, 25th of back in Washington, complete the list. But the focus here is on the Chicago hearings. Governor Mark White came and brought with him the chancellors of UT system and the Texas A&M system. And there were presentations from Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio. Dallas was typical Chamber of Commerce, no relationship to us. The Austin one, the two representatives, Chamber of Commerce, guy who almost talked too long, but Ben Streetman, who was a professor of electrical engineering, in 6 minutes, he captured excitement about the kind of students they were drawing and all the research they had ongoing. San Antonio had by far the best presentation of the 57, led by Henry Cisneros, the mayor. But he didn't have the university component. Now, let me divert here and say, what were we looking for? Quality of life, cost of living, business climate, tax climate, quality of public education for the children of prospective employees, transportation, driving times, air connections, and finally, the ability to access top quality graduate students in electrical engineering and computer science. Getting through these 25, we came down to 4 finalists: San Diego, Austin, Atlanta, Research Triangle, North Carolina. We flew in. We'd gone to San Diego first, flew in here, and it kicked off Mrs. Johnson hosting breakfast in the atrium of the LBJ Library. Governor, large delegation of people that Mark White had pulled together. And they didn't leave much room for doubt. Their bid, first, a center that would help employees get settled, everything except driver's license. The commitment to, from savings and loan and banks, fixed 30-year mortgages, 1% below the going rate in the process. For the entity itself, they would build a facility designed to our needs for $1 a year for 10 years process. And for those graduate students we were critically interested in, 8 $1 million chairs, 4 in electrical engineering, 4 in computer science, $750,000 a year for 10 years in grant aid for graduate students in electrical engineering and computer science in the process. They blew away the opposition with that deal. We announced on 18th of May that it was Austin here, and opened a liaison office on the 1st of July and moved here at the end of August.
So one of the things, we talk about MCC choosing Austin being one of those foundational landmarks that helped Austin really get the attention of the country and the world and to be able to grow into that. Why was MCC important to Austin?
George Kosmetsky, who had been dean of the Graduate Business School, he was one of the founders of Teledyne, so he was in the Fortune 400 wealthiest people. He had persuaded the governor that this was a critically important new endeavor along the way, and that Texas should go all out to capture it. And he was supported in that behind the scenes by Ross Perot, who also thought this was going to be earth-shaking for its impact on how business was done and how we pushed the frontiers of research in both computing and packaging of integrated circuits. So the 7 programs had been defined by the 15 companies that were forming this. Packaging of integrated circuits, computer-aided design, advanced software design, parallel processing, human interface, database management, and artificial intelligence. Those were the 7 programs.
It's interesting that artificial intelligence was being talked about in the early to mid 80s, because now it's the headline of every article about business. But it's interesting to remember that it goes back that far.
We hired a couple of professors from UT to do algorithms to create the database, and hired Doug Lenat away from Stanford to create the largest database ever assembled, Psych. He and Mary Shepard worked on it for 10 years. They were successful, and there was no commercial use. It spun out. 20 years later, it's finally being used by Morgan Stanley to track internal compliance with their rules. Bottom line here is a lot of hype about AI, in the process. And there will be a lot of new developments, new changes. What's not yet clear to me, where's the commercial value? Where will there be sales, products that repay all that large amount of money that's flowing after chasing AI right now?
So after MCC started, what was sort of the next several years, that next decade like here in Austin, both for MCC and for yourself? You know, you mentioned Dr. George Kosmetsky, yourself and him and Laura Kilcrease and so many people were really pivotal in coming together to help bring the attention of tech to Austin, starting back in the 80s and early 90s. So what was the whole ecosystem like?
The nationwide publicity. Why Austin? Everybody had anticipated it would be either on the east or west coast. So it caused a lot of companies to relook at Austin. 3M had looked earlier. They came back and built a facility out 2222. Even the oil industry looked at putting research labs here at all. So it highlighted the prospect, the talent pool that would be available to support research and development. There was some objection to all this public oil industry initially, why they were no longer the favored child with all this focus. But it was simply, how do you broaden the economy? Not at the expense of any, but add in the process. And talent was clearly key to that decision. So we recruited talent. Air connections was still a challenge in '83. Ross Perot loaned us a Lear 35 for 2 years. So when we wanted to hire somebody to head one of the 7 programs, we'd send the Lear to pick up the candidate and the candidate's family. If we wanted them, we got them in the process. Of the 7 criteria that we pursued, the one area where Austin ranked poorly, the 4th of the 4 in public education. We haven't done a lot about that in the intervening years, but it was the graduate level talent, which is what companies were largely looking for, and baccalaureate talent. We didn't pay attention to cultural side. And that became very apparent as we began recruiting, and we could get a candidate, but the candidate's family wanted to know what was going to be available culturally. And barbecue and country music were not enough by themselves.
For a lot of people, it's enough, but yeah, you're right. So what were some of the things we did for the cultural things back then? I mean, I know what's here today, but, and we're doing a good job now, but I moved here in 91 and, we still were lacking in some of that cultural stuff. What were some of the efforts that were made?
The impetus was to build facilities. Joe Long agreed to lay the groundwork for what became the Long Center for music, ballet, opera, and all. My wife worked on the committee with that. She also worked on a committee to create a children's museum. And she was joined by Rania Kosmeski in that effort. George Kosmeski had talked me into going on the board of an IBM PC clone startup called PC Limited, and we changed its name to Dell. 2 years along, looking to enhance internal talent, we recruited Tom Meredith to come be the chief financial officer, coming from Sun. And part of the big problem was getting his wife, Lynn Meredith. She became a leading sponsor of the Children's Museum. And you can see sort of the takeoff from those efforts.
Yeah, so many of those people, the Merediths included, the Longs, the Kosmetskis, and a list of probably 20 other people, really did contribute to being able to grow those sections of both charitable causes and arts causes and cultural causes here in Austin. So, you bring up being on the board early on for Dell Computer. Dell is another one of the sort of what I call the 10 pillars that allowed Austin to explode. What was it like being involved with Dell in the early days?
Michael was amazing. He had to learn to manage. He had, from the beginning, a great sense of how you go to market. And he didn't want to be the first one, but he wanted to be the best and the fastest once it was clear it was an area to pursue. We had to broaden the talent base and brought Tom Meredith, Kathy Thompson to be head of internal audit. And as I only stayed 5 years on the board. The last act was to bring Mort Topfer, who brought a wise internal. Michael was initially afraid that we were somehow going to plan to replace him. He realized pretty quickly we were simply, again, broadening the talent pool, and Mart was a great part of that.
So during that era, IC Squared played a big part in helping Austin grow, and then taking that message out to other communities and things like that. What was your involvement with IC Squared?
I'm an advisor on the side. George would summon me to come to a meeting, usually at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and his latest idea. He remained a thinker, a strategist. He started the technology incubator.
He started the Austin Technology Council, or Software Council at the time.
Of his own money.
Yep.
We hired Laura Kilcrease, who was a great ad in the process. But as his health began to fail, the mind was still there. And the last big meeting, he summoned Mort and me to come for an early meeting to talk about we should pay attention to gaming. Why gaming? He says, well, those handheld devices that the youngsters are using, that's going to be how they develop, how they interact, how they communicate. It's going to be a huge impact. It just, as in so many other things, he was early to recognize new trends in technology and the impact they would have on the economy. Let me come back. We'd gotten MCC up and running, and that point, the Defense Science Board had said we need a new program to compete on hardware, that Japan won't sell us the state-of-the-art hardware. And that led to putting together Semitech. And Pike Powers, who'd been chief of staff to White, who helped hold together the effort to attract MCC, now head of Fulbright and Jaworski's Austin office, became key player. I worked with him, others did, to put together the proposal that attracted MCC, that attracted Semitech. And for MCC, you had a political leader, Mark White. You had a business leader, Bill Norris. And that combination, all privately funded, got MCC off and running. For Semitech, government agreed they'd put up half the money to match private sector part. The business leader, Charlie Spork from National Semiconductor. Political side, it was Jake Pickle, the congressman, who put together the agreement to flow money for the federal government's matching funds. He called me to say, if they sent the money to defense, would defense send it to this new entity? So I called the new Undersecretary of Defense for Research Engineering, and who'd come from General Motors. He said, you can tell a congressman if the money comes the next day, it will flow to Semitech. So Semitech hadn't decided where to locate at that point. But their conclusion was, if Jake Pickle will do that for us, not knowing we ought to be in Austin. Nice. So Semitech coming was a huge jump in the national recognition of Austin as a place to do new things.
So anything we haven't covered from the 80s and the 90s that really helped bring Austin to that next level?
I think the key here, it was the publicity that boosted Austin's chances. MCC didn't have that big an impact. Semitech over the long term, they brought applied materials here, but it was the nationwide coverage of why you ought to look at Austin as the place. And at the heart of all of that was the University of Texas at Austin and its programs.
So, it's interesting. This last June, a lot of the names we mentioned, yourself, Michael Dell, Laura Kilcrease, George Kosmetsky, and several others were the first inductees into the Austin Tech Hall of Fame. And for years to come, we're going to be adding more people because we have to get to people like, Pike Powers and others who had this type of an impact. But you can't drop 60 names into a Hall of Fame in one day, and you can't do one a year or you'd never catch up. So we started with 8 foundational contributors to the Austin community, yourself being one of those. We probably should have started the Hall of Fame 20 years ago, but it was such an honor to have you at that event. And it was one of those things, the people who were there walked away reminded that what's gone on in Austin didn't just start 15 years ago. So many of the newcomers think that our tech boom just sort of bubbled up in the last 15 years. And in reality, you can trace this back to the 60s, the 70s, certainly the 80s and the 90s. I'd like to switch gears a little bit now, though, and talk about other things that you've done, because you've been involved with so many companies as an advisor, and you've been a professor at the University of Texas. So let's talk about your giving back as an advisor and you're giving back as a professor. What has been the greatest part of all of that?
I did MCC for 4 years. I did a leveraged buyout Westmark system for 3 years. I did not enjoy that. Debt was not my cup of tea. But I got involved earlier, largely by George Kosmetsky and others, in venture capital. And after Westmark, I shifted to doing that as my primary business activity. But I was serving on a number of large multinational corporate boards and a number of not-for-profit boards scattered across the country. Council on Competitiveness, Business Higher Education Forum, Caltech trustee, and all. But UT Austin had rediscovered me. I had graduated from UT in 1950, but I'd been 35 years off in the rest of the world. So they kindly gave me Distinguished Alumnus Award in 85 and approached me 2 years later to help team teach a graduate course on how government works. Initially, Bob Strauss was a key player in that. He's the one who recruited me to pro bono teach 4 classes on the national security side. Governor Connolly, Charlie Walker, who'd been Deputy Secretary of Treasury, were the other key players. Great 10-year run. Connolly became terminally ill. Strauss went off to Moscow, suddenly doing 8 classes pro bono. So
that's a lot of pro bono, Admiral.
I was about to pull the plug on that. To my great surprise, in 2000, they offered me tenure, full professor, flagship chair, the Lyndon Johnson Centennial Chair in National Policy, the LBJ School. So I accepted and did that for 20 years. So suddenly they were paying me, but I was doing 2 classes each semester. Even I was the interim dean twice for 12 months the first time, 14 months the second. Got pretty deeply involved in how the university worked. I had earlier, when Peter Flon was president, had chaired the development board for a year. President of the Texas X's in 92, 93. So as you can see, I sort of scattershot involvement across the way. Between 84 and 2018, I invested in 58 early stage companies. Much of that, the proceeds, my first 3, LASA was an effort that hadn't worked to dry chemistry for deposition chips, but Oracle and Dell certainly had.
Well, Oracle and Dell is 2 of your first 3 investments, Admiral. That's pretty good.
Well, obviously I was brilliant at it, which meant I really was just lucky and who'd invited me to be part of their activities. But it was the income from that. I left the Oracle board after 5 years, the Dell board after 5 years. It was fun scouting talent, helping companies grow. About 10%, 15% of the companies were Austin-based. The rest were across the country in the process. And I still kept my hand in on tracking national security aspects. For George H.W. Bush, for Secretary Schultz, State, I chaired a commission in 84, 85 on protecting security of embassies around the world. And then for President George H.W. Bush, I was the vice chair, and then after John Tower was killed in a plane crash, the acting chair of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board from 80 to 93. I've retired from all of those now, including I retired from the faculty in August of 81.
So what are you doing now?
Well, I've just this past October have gone from an active Caltech trustee to life trustee, though they still kept me. I was recruited to that board for oversight of Jet Propulsion Lab and for my knowledge of Washington in the process. I still track that. And I still give advice to a few early stage companies. But most people have sort of forgotten They're surprised I'm still alive.
Well, I knew you were still alive when we honored you with the Hall of Fame. In fact, I've been friends with your son Tom for a long time, so he was my first call when you were voted in to make sure that you were in town and able to come. But it's interesting because I won't say who, because I don't have permission to tell the story, but someone else who's been very prominent in the growth of Austin over the last few years, who's now in his mid to late 60s. I asked him. He has a resume like yours as far as the amount of volunteerism and the amount of giving back to things that help grow Austin. And I asked him, how did you get involved? And he said that he was about 35 years old, and Pike Powers and Bill Cunningham pulled him into a room and said, now that your career is going well and your company is going well, it's your turn to give back. What committees are you on? What boards are you on? And who are you mentoring? And it was very interesting because it was Pike Powers and Carol Thompson who did the same thing to me when I was about 38 years old and said, you're developing a reputation in town. You know, when that happens, it becomes your turn to give back and find people to mentor and boards to serve on and things, ways to serve the community. Do you think that's still happening today? Do you think the next generation is getting that tap on the shoulder and being asked to help grow the future the way you were, the way this person I'm referring to was, and so many others?
There's a mix. People who grew up here, who went to UT Austin, they're pretty visible in mentoring, in helping. But we've had a huge number of people who've moved to Austin from California, from New York. They've been huge financial successes. It's not as clear to me that they've also picked up the mentoring, sponsoring role. They may do it more quietly, not as visibly, but I think they may be working on a different stage and different things driving them in the process. The faculty at UT Austin has been key to much of this along the way, and again focused in a great deal in computer science and electrical engineering. But it's that producing talent, it's that talent flow that has attracted so many of the enterprises to come. I am immodestly, I have been asked for a number of years now to spend an evening with venture fellows at the MBA program at UT, and just simply to talk about my career, investment, how the early stage companies who were problems, challenges. Flattering me, they're still asking me to do it, even though I've been retired from the business for a long time. But it's looking for people who can they turn to for mentors, who can they turn to for advice. And they all need it. Some recognize it earlier than others.
So, you know, it's so interesting because so many of the people who spoke at the Hall of Fame induction all said the same thing that you said, and that it was about really, you know, the people. That it really came down to, you know, the people, their involvement, their giving back, their connection, their willingness to talk to each other, their willingness to show up and talk to entrepreneurs and to mentor them. As we look at Austin today, what do you think's great about our tech community? And then let's look to the future. What do you think Austin needs to do to make sure we continue to thrive?
Maybe a little critical. When MCC did its search and looked at Austin, the governor led business community involved. City council was not involved at all. In the search for Semitech, Congressman Pickle, California leader in the case of the business side, city council was not involved at all. They have not played the role I think they could have played along the way. It was at one point, I think, the mayor sent a letter out saying businesses should not consider coming to Austin unless they talk to the city council. Well, happily, everybody ignored that in the process. But city council has been very involved in social issues, dealing with some real problems, homeless in the process of public safety at all. But come back to that original series of what drew MCC to Texas, to Austin. Quality of life, cost of living, business climate, tax climate, quality of public education, transportation, driving times, talent. If you go back and look at those, quality of life, still here in spite of the hot 6-month summer. Cost of living has gone up. Austin was no longer the cheapest place to go, but it's still, compared to the two coasts, attractive process. Business climate's huge factor. That business climate is largely created by the state, not the city. So I worry a little of some of the things that drive on very conservative structure of whether the state is going to maintain the business climate, which has been so important in the process. On taxes, equitable. The reason some states fell out was because they were excessively taxing business to support. Quality of public education, still out there as a challenge.
So it's interesting because, as I look to the future, I'm pretty bullish on Austin, but I think that we've got to revisit sort of those roots of how we got here. And I do think it's very interesting when you talk about that selection of Austin by MCC, by Semitech, and by some of these other large companies that came here in that time. It was the state government, the university, and the business climate, and other leaders in the community who all came together and were willing to show up together side by side. I'm really involved with an organization called the Technology Councils of North America. And a lot of people don't realize there's 100 independent technology councils. 66 of them belong to this group, TECNA. And it's a lobbying group in Washington, D.C. for small and mid-sized companies and the things that matter to them. But it's also a best practices group. So the people who lead all of these tech councils, we get together digitally and in person. And the towns that are starting to boom are doing they're doing it differently. They're not copying Austin, but they have that element of a highly networked community and a community where those recognized leaders will show up if needed. In George Kosmetsky's biography, there was a line that says, as busy as he was, because like you, he served on commissions for like 4 different presidents, a lot of academic boards around the country, a lot of private boards around the country. But they said in his biography that if it had to do with the Austin community, if you needed him, he would show up. He didn't have to be on the panel. He didn't have to be speaking. He didn't have to be being honored. If you needed him, he was there. And I think that's something we have to embrace as we look forward. We have to get back to that. And I'm not saying we've lost it, but I think that it might be a little shaky. What do you think?
Well, it comes back to individuals and the degree to which they feel that need to give back. I had spent 31 years in the Navy, public service. Great memories from that time frame. Satisfactions. Now, in the private sector came wealth, which didn't come from my Navy time, which was wonderful for what I could do for my family and other philanthropic activities. But I'm looking broadly as I see all these names that are in that. To what degree are they giving back that commitment for public service? And that's where, when they tie in with the business and state government, local government, we've done pretty well in expanding the air connections. If you look at, in 83, you had to go to Dallas or Houston to go anywhere else. Now you've got national, international flights every day.
Yeah, you can fly many places, not all places, but you can fly most important places direct on at least one of the airlines. Nonstop, yeah.
And we've not kept up on the infrastructure for moving around the city itself. In 83, you could drive anywhere in 15 minutes. Now it takes me half an hour to get from here to downtown. in the process.
The thing I remember, I moved here in 91, and the thing I remember, it was really controversial. And coming from California, I laughed that it was controversial. The local drive time radio stations had just started doing freeway reports, doing drive reports, like on the, every 15 minutes. And people were like, why do we need that? And now, of course, we're one of the worst trafficked cities in the country.
Yeah. Because of my Caltech ties and some other investment ties, I spent a lot of time in California. In fact, that's where my family had moved in the late 40s to Orange County. But Austin is like L.A. freeways now for traffic congestion. But the country at large, it's not just Austin, has not kept up with the mobility needs of a booming economy.
Nice. As we wrap up this interview, what haven't we covered, or what would you like to say to the Austin tech community that we haven't touched on that you think is imperative moving forward that they hear from Admiral Inman?
As we look at the reality that this is now an international context, and it was to some degree when MCC was formed. It was formed to compete with the Japanese. China is a formidable competitor. Great flow of talent, much of it educated in U.S. universities going back. Key here is innovation and the speed with which you take new ideas, new potential, and turn them into products and services that the world wants, and faster than our rivals. I'm a little apprehensive that we're not putting enough focus on supporting innovation, being willing to take risks. You're not going to be successful at everything you try, but you're going to learn from it. And when you go on to the next effort, you'll do it better because of your previous experience. So focus on encouraging innovation and carefully measuring risk.
And I recently heard somebody say that for any tech community that's looking to grow, whether as large as Austin or a smaller, more rural city that's trying to grow their tech base, that if you're not a founder or an entrepreneur or a business leader, part of your job is to make sure you're supporting the founders, the entrepreneurs, and the business leaders from that innovation standpoint. Make sure that your city, Austin in our case, is supportive of that growth. And I just heard that recently.
Everybody hasn't shared equally in the boom. I put that back substantially to public education, that we were not working on the youngsters coming up from the Hispanic and Black communities at the same pace. We've gotten better in the process, but it's, as you look at demographics, it's particularly the growth in the Hispanic community. We have to ensure that we bring them along to be the leaders we need in the future, in business as well as in government.
So my last question for you is what I ask everybody who comes on the show, and that is the three words that mark my life that I believe deeply in are community, collaboration, and conversations. And I believe when we have more of those three things, we can solve all problems. So when I say those words, community, collaboration, or conversation, which one resonates the most with you and why?
Collaboration.
And why?
It's rare that things get accomplished solely on an individual talent. It's the ability to bring together competing sources of support, talent, innovation, financing that lead us to go forward. We have the potential in Austin to be the next great center of biotechnology expansion along the way, between now having Dell Medical School, computer science, bioengineering, et al. We've got to focus on technology transfer and speed, early innovation to get those ideas into services and products that put us at the lead of what's going on, not only in this country, but in the world.
Admiral Bobby Inman, it has been an honor to sit down and talk with you. Once again, congratulations for being one of our first inductees into the Austin Technology Council's Austin Tech Hall of Fame. Next year, we look to have you there present when we honor the next 8 foundational members and the 2025 member that will be inducted at that time. And keep doing the good work that you're doing.
Thank you, and I greatly appreciate the honor. All the best.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. You know what? If it wasn't for the audience, why would we do this show? Do me a favor. Pass this show on. This has been a great interview with a true legend here in Austin. Make sure that everyone in your company had a chance to hear it and hear the interviews that we do every single week. And now is a great time for your company to be involved with the Austin Technology Council. We're shaking things up. We're breaking the mold. We're like a 32-year-old nonprofit startup, but I can't do it alone. We need you to take your seat at the table and share your voice. So join the Austin Technology Council today.
Thanks for listening to the Austin Tech Connect podcast. Make sure your company is a member of the Austin Technology Council and add your voice to the future of our tech ecosystem in Central Texas.